let's talk about what not to put in your speech. I like to call these the 5 P's. Avoid the 5 P's. First P, profanity. It's a wedding. Grandma's there. Don't be a fucking idiot. Stay away from the profanity. Poop. Don't mention poop. Now you may be thinking, yeah, Beth, I wasn't going to mention poop in my speech. Well, it sounds obvious, but for instance, my dad mentioned poop in his father of the bride speech. Apparently when I was 2, I reached into my diaper and pulled out a present for him. So don't mention poop in your speech, even if you're a parent, even if it's said with love. Yes, there are ways to kind of finesse it and get around it, but you have to have better stories. My dad had known me for 40 years at that point. I'm sure he had one other story. Projectile vomiting. Don't mention that. Again, I know you may be thinking you weren't planning on mentioning vomiting in your speech, but a lot of you, if you're the best man or the maid of honor, maybe you went to college with the bride or the groom. Maybe you went to a lot of parties with the bride or the groom. Maybe you saw the bride or the groom do a lot of projectile vomiting in college. And, you know, the bride may be the kind of person who will hold your hair while you vomit, but people are eating. That's where these speeches are delivered. Essentially, these speeches are delivered at a dinner. So even though this is a great character trait, that the bride is the kind of person who will hold your hair back while you barf, maybe you can find a different way to describe what a great friend she is. The next P to avoid, previous partners. Don't mention any of the previous partners of the bride or groom. Casual partners or serious partners. If you're the best man, you don't need to talk about the fact that the groom slept with everyone he could until he met the bride who opened his eyes. People don't need to hear that. You can just say he was real happy when he met her. You don't have to mention that. Parents of the bride. You don't need to mention that all the other losers that your daughter brought home before she finally brought home the groom. We can assume that he's the one that she likes best. Just keep it focused on the good. Don't mention previous partners. Finally, politics. Don't mention politics. It's crazy town out there. It's never been a good thing to mention in a speech. Now, more than ever, people are just looking for a reason to get angry. Every side of the spectrum. Don't mention politics. And one, because the focus of your speech should be the bride and groom. So why you need to have a punchline that has a political figure in it or a political issue, you can find a different punchline. Also, for your own sake, performance-wise, if you mention politics or an issue or something and you come down on a side of it, you may think you know the political leanings of everybody in that audience, but you probably don't. So when you mention something that's divisive, if the people out there, if a lot of them have a different view, now they're not going to start pelting you with rolls and they're not going to stand up and stomp out. What they're going to do is they're just going to tune out. They're going to think, oh, this idiot. And then their mind's just going to wander. Now, as the person who's up there speaking, you want everybody's full attention. Because when you have everyone's full attention, then you have a room that's laughing together and going, oh, or, and toasting together. If you've alienated half the room and their minds are wandering because they've just checked out now, you're not going to get as good a response. And you're going to feel that. You're just going to feel like you've kind of lost the room. People are going to start to get distracted, or you're going to start seeing the tops of their heads while they start looking at their phones. So keep everyone together. Let's all be on the same page. You don't have to agree with their politics. Just keep the politics out of it. So, all that said, exceptions and workarounds. Profanity. If there is one curse word that is the punchline to one story, so for instance, when your daughter was 3 years old, she repeated something you said in traffic. And it's a great story, and it's one word, and it's a lot of bang for the buck, and it's said in a way that is cute, in a context that's cute. It's not gratuitous. You're not just saying, oh, she's fucking great. The word is being used in a way that where it's a punchline, you can probably get away with it. Poop, tough to get away with, but I did have a guy, he was a best man, and he had 2 little boys, and the groom didn't have any kids, so they were together quite often, and at one point the best man, who had a couple of little boys, one of his little boys filled his diaper and then some, and the groom was with him, and he got a crash course in what it's like to clean up a car seat and a child in the parking lot of a grocery store. So that was a story where, yes, it involved poop. We talked around it. We never said poop. We said filled up his diaper and just said it was, a bomb site or something like that. You can talk around it. But that was a story. It really was about this guy learning what being a parent was about. It wasn't having spectacular, it wasn't eating a bad burrito. Projectile vomiting, kind of same thing. If the story, you never want to actually talk about vomiting, but if the story is that the bride and the groom went to Cabo for their first vacation together, and they got food poisoning together, and they had a miserable trip, but they came back and realized, well, wow, if I can spend 3 days being sick in a hotel room with this person and still like them and be more in love with them and think of it as a great experience, well, that's a different kind of story. Previous partners, again, you kind of want to stay away from it unless you're the previous partner. So I had a woman who was the groom was her best friend. So this woman was best friends with the groom. Years before that, years and years, they dated, but as it turned out, she was gay. So, her being the best man, there was a reason for her to kind of mention the fact that they'd been an item at one point, that she and the groom had been an item. It wasn't going to be threatening to anyone. No one had to do any math, and, they weren't cheating on anyone. It was why they were friends. It was how they met. Politics, probably still no reason to mention it. I would stay away from politics. Even if the person you're talking about is in politics and you're the parent and the bride or the groom, they work in DC and they love what they do and they're a lobbyist, you could probably leave it at that. You don't need to mention politics if you can at all stay away from it. Can't we all just use a break from politics for an afternoon or for an evening? Because this is, look at my big finish. I was going to say, what you don't want is to deliver your speech, stumble into one of the 5 Ps, and look out from the stage and see that. It's no good. You don't want it. Stay away from the 5 Ps.